Welcome to Third Floor Views, where we at Chesapeake Family Life talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Today, we're talking about anxiety and managing the return to the classroom. Today, we are being joined by school psychologist from the Summit School, Genevieve White, and Dr. Leslie Eggett. Thank you so much to both of you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Let's jump right in. So, how do you feel the past year has impacted children's mental health? And I know that that's a really big question, but I think it's one that's on everyone's minds right now. It's been a long year. And what are the implications of that? Leslie, why don't we start with you?
Okay. So, children's reactions to the pandemic and, any type of traumatic event, because at this point it was a bit traumatic, especially those early months that we went through. But depending on their age and their developmental level, the degree of social support that they have and the type of coping skills they have, you could see varying, reactions in kids. But for the most part, I would suggest that you might be seeing in infants and toddlers and young children, it might present as fussiness or irritability. Perhaps they're crying more easily than they had in the past. They might be harder to console when they're having a meltdown, falling asleep and waking up during the night when maybe that had passed by now. Feeding issues, stomach pains, you might start to see some separation anxiety if you have to leave the house for something, clinginess, that you might even see some regression in some previously learned skills like bedwetting and things like that. In older children and teenagers, the manifestations could be very different. You might see intense mood changes. It might be a bit more unusual because, let's face it, all teenagers kind of can have moods, but a little bit more intense than what you're typically seeing in your child. More ongoing irritability, feelings of hopelessness. Some could be very angry because, this has really disrupted a lot of their lives. And honestly, I feel like they're handling it really well, like not having a graduation. I think back when I was in high school, I can't imagine not having those things that we had. And a lot of the kids last year, especially, weren't able to do those things. So, but they could be angry about it. Maybe they're losing interest in doing the schoolwork. And I've heard this from, people that I know and the children of friends of mine that, the virtual learning is not the same. And they kind of tuned out a little bit. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in other things during the school day. So they lose a little bit of interest sometimes in academics, and they don't put forth as much effort. They may be losing kind of a grip on their hygiene and doing less grooming. So all of these things, you definitely want to keep out for. And some can be pretty minor, but then they can get more reckless, like drugs and alcohol. So, parents just really need to check in. And Jen will talk a little bit about that later with making sure you're checking in with your children to see how they're doing so that you can monitor those things. Now, that a year has passed, there is studies coming out now that are showing a bit of the impact on mental health in children. One thing that I had seen from the CDC is that compared to 2019, there was a 24% increase in emergency mental health in children ages 5 to 11.
That's a big number. That's
right,
a huge increase.
Right. And it's even higher for 12 to 17-year-olds. It's at about 34% increase from the years past. So definitely, we're starting to see that there is that impact of mental health. Teenagers are reporting, national studies have shown that, they feel like 30% more unhappy or depressed than they had in the previous year. So I think, we'll talk a lot about this, but, we need to start working on how we can kind of reverse some of these things that we're starting to see in our kids.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big laundry list of symptoms that we're seeing or new challenges or new issues. And I think not only is it overwhelming for the kids to be living it and experiencing it, but of course it's going to be overwhelming for parents as well. Let's talk a little bit about why is this happening? Obviously, it is because of the pandemic, but what situations is the pandemic causing to create these new behaviors? Genevieve, could you just talk a little bit about what reasons do you think these behaviors are on the rise?
Sure. There's a wide variety of, changes that have impacted us are, the schedules and routines are very different. There's a huge impact on parents and stress levels and working from home and managing that, and also their kids doing schooling at home. And there is also the stressor of COVID related deaths, and a lot of unknown. The pandemic has given us a lot of anxiety and worry because every day is a new day and everything keeps changing and we don't know what the future is going to hold. It's obviously getting better as we progress, but there's still so much unknown out there. So this is just causing a lot of uncomfortable feelings in kids, and a lot of the environments in general are making us really, it's very stressful. So it's causing a lot of reactions in our children as well. And Leslie, you can add in a little bit there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, as adults, we're feeling off balance. So it trickles down into our kids, because even though we might not be saying that we're stressed, our body language can tell all of that, as well as, kids know a lot more about things than we think that they do sometimes. So I think they're in tune with us. And when we feel off balance, then they are also off balance. And, they need that more than we do as adults. So, just really supporting them and helping them kind of work through those things is really important.
Mm-hmm. So what are some things that you can recommend to parents? I think, we, as both as school psychologists, but then also, working with students, what are some things that adults can do to make things better? I think there's only so much of, like, yes, we can put on a brave face as adults, but then we're in it too. So what are some maybe tangible things that you could recommend to help make this better? So whether it's something very specific, like we really need to work on going to bed at the same time every night, or we need to cut back on the unhealthy snacks and focus more on, fruits and vegetables, like things that are maybe simple, but in all of the craziness, we've sort of let slide. What are some things that we can come back to make this better?
I think, I really wanted to talk about sleep a little bit because the pandemic has really impacted our sleep and our children's sleep for a variety of different reasons. Some kids are sleeping longer. They might be, sad or depressed, or some kids are not sleeping enough because they're worried, they're having nightmares, they're getting up at night, or because their schedules are changing. So they're on devices longer, so they're going to bed later. And then that's kind of really messing up, how they're feeling the next day if they're not getting as much sleep. I was just talking with some of my elementary school students about sleep, and I'm realizing that some of them were going to bed at 11, 12 o'clock, 1 in the morning because they were on devices. And then we're in-person learning, and we've been so since August. And so they're still waking up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. So the amount of time they've been sleeping has been cut down significantly. So they're, fatigued, and they're, they don't have good focus. And, sleep affects how much, we're storing at night, everything that we've learned during the day, we need that time that we're sleeping for it to store. So it's getting, kids are getting more frustrated because they're not remembering things. So looking at you and your child's sleep schedule, and even looking at, when you transition back to a regular routine, what that might look like, and maybe slowly starting to modify it. So you don't want to say, okay, your child's going to bed at 10, I want them to go to bed at 8, and, make that change right overnight. So maybe slowly starting to modify it by increments, or by half hours, or by just introducing more, sleep routines in the evening, taking electronics away earlier, or introducing, relaxation scripts to do. A lot of the kids are going to bed and they're worrying about things that they can't control, or they don't know that's going to happen the next day. So sometimes doing relaxation scripts or mindfulness is helpful to get them to get their thoughts and focus on, the present moment, and not have their thoughts just really worried about, what's going on. And those are strategies that will be good for any time, not just during the pandemic. So starting to introduce those now, especially in the evening hours, is going to be really helpful for them. And there are also podcasts for children, just to kind of listen to stories and help them get their mind off of what's going on the next day or that day. I also, checking in with your kid, as, Dr. Eggett was saying, I think helping kids develop a self-awareness of their feelings. The pandemic has brought on, and for any kid, when they're feeling anxious or worried, they have a hard time understanding what that feeling is. So that can manifest itself in, anger, frustration, yelling, because they don't know what they're feeling. They're very uncomfortable. So waking up in the morning and checking in with your child. How do you feel today? And have them give you a feeling. And then at the end of the day, talk about how that feeling may have impacted them throughout the day. How did it change how you did your homework assignment, or how did it change how you interacted with your friends? And, nothing punitive. It's just a conversation about those feelings and identifying them, and how that they can impact you and your relationships is really helpful for kids just to build some self-awareness. And then even doing some goal setting with them in the morning, give them, the pandemic has made us lose control of a lot of things, right? We have no control over, so much. So giving your kids some sense of control, like, what's a good goal for you today? And don't make it like they have to do it, but have them, identify a goal that they feel that they can work on, and then have them, let you know if they made it at the end of the day. And again, it just kind of gives them some sense of, this is what I'm doing and I'm working towards, and I can control this. And that is really helpful too. Anywhere where you can give your child a sense of control is helpful, but also the self-awareness in kids is really good for them.
That was super helpful. I think a reminder in terms of anytime you do change a schedule, to do it in incremental bits so it's not as shocking. And I think that's so true with kids. I think to establish that vocabulary for feelings, and then how to grow that. And so kids are building awareness. And so it is a lifelong skill. I think that's really helpful. And then, of course, goal setting. Again, that's something that parents, I think, easily forget that that's a helpful tool to use, that is very manageable for anyone, anytime, which again, as you said, will give maybe a little bit of control back. It's like, oh, maybe my goal is super small today, but it's like, oh, I got my goal, so I'm feeling good.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's such a big deal. And those are all such tangible tools that parents can take on.
You can also work in some problem solving strategies with that too, because, we want to develop in our kids ways to problem solve so they don't feel completely helpless, especially when something like this happens. A lot of kids feel like I can't control anything. So, if you do some goal setting with your kid, that sets you up for, if you didn't meet your goal that day, maybe they can problem solve and figure out how they can meet it the next day, or how they can work towards meeting it. And those problem solving skills are really helpful, and they're really protective factors for a crisis or a pandemic or something, because they build resiliency and they give a child a sense of control. So I think the goal setting and problem solving, go hand in hand, and both of those will help children kind of feel, confident, like they have, they can be more resilient in times like that.
Mm-hmm. And those, of course, are really helpful things to work on at any age, whether it be the really little kids, but then also all the way up to adults. Those are really useful skills to constantly be working on. So we've talked a lot about a lot of the negatives that have happened, and now we've talked about a few tangible things that we can do to improve our current situation. How do we look maybe at the bigger picture and think about how can we reverse the impact of this past year as things are changing, as the CDC is coming out with new guidelines? What are some things that you're recommending to your students and families that people can participate in safely and start to move towards maybe a more healthy space? And Leslie, let's start with you.
Okay. So, I was kind of thinking, it's not all doom and gloom. Like, I want this to be like, something that we can be hopeful about. And, honestly, the majority of kids aren't going to develop long-term mental health problems that are associated with the pandemic. If you have children who had pre-existing conditions of anxiety, they might need a bit more support than other children. But I think once we start taking baby steps to get back to the way things used to be, I'm not saying all at once we need to jump in, but taking baby steps, and as adults feeling more comfortable with taking some minimal risks. Now that adults have the opportunity to be vaccinated, the weather's getting nice, we can be outside more. I think that it's important to kind of help the kids reestablish some relationships that they've been missing over the years. Sadly, I'm not from this area, but I haven't seen my family, my kids haven't seen, their cousins and things in over a year. So, now that it's safer to travel and to do those things, and, my son hasn't seen his best friend who lives just 40 minutes from us in over a year, and he has a birthday next month. So I'm planning to have maybe 2 friends over outside, and I think that's a baby step. We're not going to have a huge party, but we need to start taking steps to get them back establishing those relationships with their peers. And like I said, I really feel like the adults need to be on board too, because I think as adults, I think sometimes we worry so much about what could happen. But, with the data coming out about children, unless they have pre-existing conditions, aren't really going to get sick, majorly sick from coronavirus, when we have preventative things in place, that most likely they're going to be okay. I think we need to just start taking those baby steps to kind of get back to some sense of normalcy. Although I know it's going to take a while to get back truly, but just the baby steps. And I think socialization is a big part of that, because currently kids right now, their only means of socializing is online playing video games. And, they're doing it at all hours of the night. And I think they're really starting to crave that interaction with people in person.
When we shut down in last March 2020, we were seeing a lot of those. And then when our kids were able to transition back in August to in-person learning at the Summit School, we saw a lot of those symptoms alleviated, and just they were so happy to be back in person. And they all wear their masks 100% of the time, unless they're eating, even outside when they're playing. And they're just so happy to be back. So, that is, it's been wonderful to be at Summit and be able to see that with the kids. We definitely did see, did I already talk about this? Some difficulty transitioning back in a little bit just at first, just because the change of being at home and then coming back to in person, there's a change in schedule. You have to get up earlier. You have less access to breaks sometimes, when you want them. You have less access to screen time and things. So at the very beginning, kids had difficulty coming back in, but then they, once they adjusted and were able to see their friends and play, they're so happy to be back. And a lot of them, prefer to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that socialization is such a big deal. It is for all of us, but I think particularly for kids when they're stuck at home with parents and they don't have as much control in terms of their schedule and where they can go, especially, if they're younger. So school is their outlet. And so when they don't have that, then it becomes really challenging. So getting back into that schedule, I can see it being very important. So you had mentioned also, mindfulness, maybe getting off social media or whatever, whether that's video games or social media or maybe even just classic TV. What are some other things that parents can do now this spring to recommend that their kids move more towards a healthy direction? But then also, as of course, we're moving quickly into summer where everyone's going to be out of school, how can we continue to set up our kids for success? What are some things that you can recommend that families focus on the late spring into summer?
I would just suggest to, start doing routines, even though those routines may change day to day, but going over with your kid what the routine is going to be for the next day, so they're aware. If you have the same routine every day and your kid goes to camp every day, that makes it a little bit easier. But if your routines change every day, make sure you're kind of reviewing that with your child, making visuals for them. Sometimes it's hard for them to understand what they're going to do the next day, and that can cause a little bit of, anxiety, not knowing what's going to happen. So reviewing that with them, going through with them, like, giving them some take in the conversation about, like what would you like to do? Maybe giving them some sense of control there too. But I think that, and really focusing on the sleep and scheduling. I think sleep is so important. I keep going back to that, but it's impacting so many of our kids right now in so many different ways. So looking at those sleep schedules and how to get your kids. And I think mindfulness is, I always go back to that too. I love mindfulness. And I think it's really important for our kids to kind of figure out ways to de-escalate and calm themselves when they are feeling really nervous or worried or anxious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, building those lifelong skills. I think mindfulness is something that's helpful for everyone.
Right. And I think summer camps are a great opportunity for kids too, to get out there and socialize a bit in a safe way, because there's going to be camp counselors and things like that and people like that on the premises that are going to be able to help manage the masks and the social distancing so they can do it safely and in a structured kind of way.
Yeah, I think, Leslie, that's a great suggestion. And as you're saying, that they're experts, so they've been
Mhm.
trained to handle this, how to deal with kids in a pandemic. So if you're worried as a parent, it's a safe place to put them, especially if it's outside. So we've talked a little bit about both the resilience of children, but then we've also talked about how kids are really struggling. So a little bit about the fragility of children. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. And how worried should parents be right now? Is this something that we need to take as parents a more active role into, like, okay, we've got to move forward and getting our kids back on track? Or you think the resilience of kids, they'll just bounce back once we get them more into a normal schedule? Where does COVID and the epidemic and mental health fall in this mix of everything? So if you could just speak a little bit about the spectrum, I guess, of how worried should we be as parents right now?
No, I think that, like Dr. Egan said, that the majority of the kids are not going to develop long-term mental health issues. So I think it's always good to keep that in mind. But if you do feel like, your kid is at risk, maybe they have pre-existing mental health conditions, or they're showing behaviors that are very severe and very different from what you're used to,
Hmm.
early intervention is really important. So I would definitely recommend reaching out to a counselor or therapist and getting intervention as soon as possible. I know even just building a relationship with a counselor or therapist over the summer. So when you do we do transition back into in-person learning in the fall, they'll have that relationship built with them, and maybe they can, it'll be easier to go through and help with some coping strategies and things like that. But it is a huge spectrum, and I think every parent knows their child best. But if you do have this gut feeling that something is wrong and it's not, not typical, definitely reach out. But again, with that being said, the majority of kids are, once we transition back to, more normal as the day, as the year goes on, the majority of the kids will bounce back and be okay. Resiliency, the biggest factor in resiliency is, one stable, committed relationship with an adult or caregiver. So that's really important to keep in mind as well. But there is a huge spectrum. So, you know your child best. And if you have, like I said, you have that gut feeling, then I would definitely reach out to
Right.
somebody.
And I just wanted to touch on the academic part of things, because our kids certainly have not had the education this year that they have had in previous years. And that's to fault nobody. We're in a pandemic. And I think, it makes me think of it because I had a consultation with a family last week who is considering retaining their child because of the lack of skills and progress this year. And I guess I would just want to say that we're all in the same boat. So we're going to have to do some reteaching and some remediation of skills across the board. So it's not just you and it's not just your child. So just know that everybody is struggling. So I don't think that you need to take some drastic measures like that, but I think I would trust in the school system to do those interventions, the things to get the kids back up to speed. But it may take some time, but it's not that there's a problem with the child. It's a systemic thing that we're going to need to work through.
Yeah, I think actually hearing from both of you, it's really comforting because you're saying, look, kids are fairly resilient. We're going to be okay. But again, trust your gut. And as a parent, I think that's reassuring to hear. It's like, okay, yes, like I do know my kids. And so I know when something's wrong, and that we're all a team. We're a team, and that all of the teachers at school and the counselors at school and the psychologists, we're all working together to help get these kids back on track. And that we're all, Leslie, like you said, we're all in this together. The pandemic didn't happen to us individually, it happened to us collectively. And I think that's a great reminder, because in these times we're feeling so isolated and we're just like, all these problems, I have all of these problems, but it's really, we have this problem, and that we're just going to figure it out together, and it's going to be okay. So I think that's a great reminder that I think a lot of anxious parents benefit from hearing. So with that, I have one more question for both of you before we end today, and it's ending on a positive note. And Genevieve, you sort of, or maybe it was Leslie, you alluded to this, that it's not all doom and gloom. So what are some maybe good things that have come of this past year? What are some positives that we can maybe even carry forward in the future? And I think, we've already talked a little bit about learning some new life skills, whether that be meditation nutrition or, making sure that we're on a healthy sleep routine. But then I would love to also hear a little bit about your experience at Summit, because you guys have been through this. You've been in person this year. So as a lot of us parents and even teachers right now are thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this in person? You have done it successfully in person. So thinking about what are some positive from your experience that we can move forward into late spring and then even probably into next fall?
I can speak of, some things that we have done differently that we will probably continue to do, pandemic or not. And one of which is how we hold parent conferences. Just in meeting with parents, it's been so much nicer to do them virtually. The parents don't need to leave work to come to them. We actually have more, involvement, and it's just much easier to kind of manage, which just makes everything so much better when you're working collectively with the parents. So I think that, for one, is probably something that will continue, and we'll be able to have more meetings because it's just so hard to fit everything in sometime with the teacher's schedule. So I know that's one thing that off the top of my head, I can't imagine us going back to the old way of doing things.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. I know with my daughter's school, we have done any sort of meeting has now gone virtual. And as a parent with young children, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a game changer, because I don't have to worry about a babysitter. I don't have to worry about, shuffling schedules, and both me and my partner can attend, which is like, oh my gosh, everyone's involved. This is incredible.
Right. Right. And the technology that the children have learned this year is amazing. They know way more than I know now. My elementary school and early middle school kids, they are well beyond what I know of technology. So, and our teachers have really, gone above and beyond to learn all of the new ways of doing, who knew that you could do math manipulatives with a computer? All of that hands-on stuff that we were used to doing, they've been so creative in creating new ways of doing things. So I think, the teachers, all across the United States and probably other countries have really stepped up to make it as engaging as they can. So I think some creativity and, like I said, the kids just knowing how to do technology now is just so helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that technology piece is something that we do forget about. Genevieve, is there anything that you can think of that's sort of a positive from this experience that we can carry forward?
I think the thing that I always think about with this pandemic is that I think as parents, sometimes we want to just instinctually just try and protect our children from everything, right? So
Yes.
We don't want them to worry. We don't want them to, have anything bad happen to them. And we were really unable to protect them from this pandemic in a way because it was so in your face. And, there was this massive shutdown and you just had to see it, right? So the kids just had to have been exposed to it in some level or at some level. And I think that just the fact that we were able to work our kids through this and build resiliency is actually a really, a good way to look at it. Like, we can work through this. And we did work through this, and we've learned some coping strategies to help deal with this. And, just trying to reframe it like that is sometimes helpful because, it was unavoidable. We had to go, unfortunately go through it. And, but trying to reframe it like that is sometimes just helpful for me, that our kids did learn a lot of good coping strategies in the process. So.
Right. And just spending more time with your family. I think that was another big takeaway, that, families got so much more time together doing things that they probably otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. I know for my family, it's been that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think now that we're at the tail end of this, we're all like, oh, family, I've had enough. But I think that is so important to remember that this was in some ways really, really magical, and that to have this time. And I think if we, as you mentioned, Genevieve, how to reframe that. And instead of being like, I need to not be near my family right now, think of it as like, oh, this has been a powerful experience, and to be thankful for what we have. That's a great reminder. So thank you, Leslie. Well, thank you so much to Genevieve White and Dr. Leslie Eggett from Summit School. And a big special thank you for Summit School for helping us discuss some of the challenges with the pandemic and how to get back to school and into a routine in a positive and healthy way. We'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and questions. If you enjoyed what you heard today, check out more at thirdfloorviews.com. I'm Jana Jefferson. This is Third Floor Views. Thank you for listening.